And now it's time for the Joe Wentz Project Podcast. Tonight's special guest, Steve Rosen. What's going on, everybody? Here we are, man. We're here. What's happening? Welcome to a special edition of the Joe Wentz Project Podcast. It's a Sunday evening, and normally I would be on the road or going down the road in the big rig and doing the deal. It is August 4th. All right, here we go. So we have a special guest tonight. I'm very, very excited about this. I was just really floored. Here he is, Mr. Steve Rosen is here with us tonight. Hey, Steve. Look at that. Awesome. Man, look at all those pictures you got. That is so cool.
Yeah, man. If we could scan over, you'd see that every wall is covered in this room. Every wall is covered in my bedroom. Every wall is covered in the front room. I either got to make more money or get rid of some pictures and buy a bigger house, you know?
Now, how much are we talking with all those pictures? How many years did it take to fill up your walls like that?
Well, I mean, the reality is I really started writing in, I always say it was 73, but the truth is I was actually doing some early writing sort of like by mid to late 72. It wasn't big time stuff. It was some local newspapers, small little, neighborhood newspapers. So really 73 is when I started. So it's really 73, and I really just kind of, pulled away. It's probably been about 4 years ago. So that's 2020? So 73 to 2020 is what, 83, 93, 2003, 2013? Yeah, man, it's like 50 years of interviews, and even then I think of all of the interviews I did where I didn't get a photo with somebody. Wow. I mean, there's so many. I just cringe to think of all the people I missed. I wish I had. I mean, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, and oh my God, wow. There are just so many. Steve Winwood, and my heroes. And either there was no photographer that I could, who was available that day, or the publicist or management might have told me no photographers allowed. But even then, I should have brought a photographer anyway. I mean, the worst I could have done is said, hey, you can't take pictures, and the photographer would have to wait outside. But yeah, man, a lot of years, a lot of interviews, a lot of photos snapped for sure.
That's awesome. So what, in your opinion, by the way, everybody, we're talking with Steve Rosen, who is the author of Tonechaser, which I have right here. I want to present myself right there. That is a wonderful book, Tonechaser by Steve Rosen. We're talking to him this evening, and he was kind enough to send me this copy. But if you want to check the description below, I have links down there for the if you want the hardback edition or if you want the audio version. There's links below. Check those and click them and get your copy today. So in your opinion, what I was thinking about this past week, what was the first interview that kind of put you out there? That kind of like, okay, Steve Rosen has arrived. Here we go. This is the one interview that kind of broke you out there. Which interview would that be?
I mean, that's a good question. I always sort of base that on my December 1973 cover story in Guitar Player magazine with Jeff Beck. So I did that interview probably, came out in December 73. So I probably did it 3 or 4 months earlier. Typically a magazine, would work a couple of months in advance. If you went to the magazine stand in August, the date on there might read October or November. So they were always ahead. And the lag time, the time I would do an interview to the point I would send it into a magazine, it took them at least a month to turn it around, get it typeset and graphics and photos, etc. But I always use that Jeff Beck interview as sort of the springboard, that kind of put me out there as you described it, Joe. And that interview was just, that was one of the most memorable interviews I ever did. Jeff Beck was and still is my favorite guitar player. I think he's the most incredible guitar player of all time. Edward Van Halen was an extraordinary guitar player. But I grew up listening to Jeff Beck. So, I saw Jeff Beck with Rod Stewart, the Jeff Beck group, perform at the Shrine Auditorium here in Southern California, 1968. So I was 15 years old. And I just, I can remember hearing the Yardbirds songs on the radio, Over, Under, Sideways, Down, and Heart Full of Soul, and Jeff Beck, and he just, from that moment, I thought, he was the greatest. So it was that interview. It was my first story for Guitar Player, and that first story turned into a cover. From that point on, from 73 until 79, I did 16 covers, and they did 12 issues a year, and so that's like 72 issues, and I did 16. So basically, every 4.5 issues was one of my cover stories. So I really, I owned the magazine. There's no other way to put it. I was just like the freelance guy, and I was doing remarkable stories. Guitar Player opened the door. Guitar Player back in the day was the Bible. If you were a guitar player, you wanted to be in Guitar Player magazine, because really it was the only magazine of its kind. Joe Wentz wants to go and find out, well, what kind of amp is John McLaughlin using? What does he use on those Mahavishnu records? Well, there was no place to go, right? There were no podcasts. You couldn't go online. You couldn't Google it. You had to go and pick up a copy of Guitar Player magazine. So, yeah, man, it was just like an open door, I would subsequently do John Entwistle, John McLaughlin, Joe Walsh, Ronnie Wood, Richie Blackmore, Jimmy Page, John Entwistle. And then because I'm writing for Guitar Player, as you said, Joe, put me out there in the world. So now every other magazine, publications knew about Guitar Player. So I say, hey, listen, I just did a huge feature in Guitar Player with David Gilmour. I'd like to interview Gary Moore for Cream magazine or Circus, whatever magazine I was going after. And so they look at, they know I wrote for Guitar Player. I was legit, and they go, yeah, sure, Gary Moore will be here next week. So I count that as sort of the springboard. Though I had done some interviews prior to that, but that was really the one. And a real quick anecdotal story. So I'm there. I go knock on his hotel room door, and I'm terrified. It's my God, I'm meeting Jeff Beck. I can't believe I'm there. It was really an out-of-body experience. Part of me said, you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it. Turn around and walk away. And I was terrified of it. But I thought, I can't walk away. So I knock on the door, and I figure somebody else is going to answer the door. He answers the door.
Oh, man.
Say hello, when I walk in. So we're sitting down, we start talking, and he's amazing. Like I said, I knew all about his earlier bands. We're talking about his early bands and his early gear. And we get to the end of a cassette. I'm recording everything on cassette. I had this piece of garbage cassette player. Literally, it was a piece of garbage. It was like $3 cassette player with a $2 Radio Shack microphone. So I come to the end of the tape, and I rewind it a little bit just to check the level. And I rewind it, and there's nothing there. So I thought, I didn't rewind it enough. There was a leader on the end. So I rewind it a little more, and there's nothing there. And he is watching this go on. I hit play, and Joe, you could have told me this. You're supposed to hit record also.
Oh, man.
I did not hit record. Can you freaking believe that? I thought at that moment, that's it. It's over. Guitar Player? forget guitar player. That story gets out. You're never going to interview another person in your life. He was so cool. Jeff was so cool. He said, "Hey, I saw what happened. Don't worry about it. Let's continue from here, and you can come back tomorrow."
Oh, wow. Gave you a second. I gave you a mulligan. Wow.
I led a charmed life, man. So, yeah, so Jeff Beck was the kicking off point for everything.
That's amazing. What a nice, I'm so glad that ended that way, because I was sitting there going, oh, God. Because you wouldn't expect that type of response, or even a response at all like that from somebody of that upper echelon of entertainment.
No, hell no.
I wouldn't.
It's like me, going for an interview, and the guy shows up a half hour late. And me saying, "Oh, hey, man, don't worry about it. It's totally cool." It's like, Jeff could have been exasperated. He could have been annoyed.
Right.
He could have said, "Okay, well, look, you're here. Let's continue." And he could have, just not been committed to the interview. Could have just gone through the motions. But he was great. And real quickly, the second day, I had a 73 Strat with the big headstock. I thought it was an all maple. Somebody said, "No, you're wrong. It's a maple body and an ash neck." It was a beautiful guitar, and I just brought it to say, "Hey man, here, play the guitar while we're talking," or to let him know that I play guitar, blah blah blah. So anyway, there and he goes, "Oh, what do you got?" And he takes it out and he starts playing, and he goes, "Wow, this is a really cool guitar, man. I really love this guitar." I was about that far away from saying it's yours.
Oh wow!
But what's fantastic is I listened back to the cassette, and you can hear him playing. I mean,
he's jamming on your guitar.
He's jamming on my guitar.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's amazing. We have a few people in the chat that's popping in. We're early in the game. Right here we have, let me get my applause button ready. I like to give everybody some applause for showing up. Mr. R3 Lockinut from Chicago. There he is. R2, what's going on, brother? And we have Gear Up Guitar, which is Larry Riker. Larry, what's going on? He says, I saw Jeff Beck live. He was amazing.
The greatest.
And my friend, the German butcher, Ralph, he says, what a great way what a great life it is to meet people of that stature. So many rock stars, he says. Thank you, Ralph. That's awesome. I grew up, just a little quick side note, Steve, I grew up with Ralph. We grew up together. We've known each other since we were 10 years old.
Wow.
And we got our guitars at the same year, 1986, and Christmas and all that stuff. So yeah, just a little side note there. But and if I don't give him a shout out, he'll probably get upset with me. So there you go, Ralph. There's your shout out to Mr. Steve Rosen. There you go.
Thanks for having me.
Martin's in the chat.
Coming by.
Yeah, that's right. Martin, what's going on? He says, hello, Steve. Hello, Joe. And my good friend, Ricky Hull, fellow truck driver. What's up, Joe? He says, hey, Ricky, thank you for tuning in, my friend. Thank you. So we're getting people jumping in here, Steve. See there? Nice. So that's cool, man. Again, folks, we're talking to Steve Rosen, the author of Tonechaser. Let me present myself one more time. Of this book right here, this amazing book. If you're a fan of Eddie Van Halen, you need this book. It is a fantastic book. And if you check the links in the description below, you can order your own hardback cover or the audio version, whichever suits you. I have both. And Steve was kind enough to autograph mine for me. So that was awesome, man. And I usually have it sitting right back here on top of the rack, but I took it down so I could grab a hold of it and kind of give you some close-ups there, just people like, oh, you don't have that book. The hell I don't. So there we go. But all right, let's see. So you start off with Jeff Beck. That's your first kind of big deal. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I did take down some notes, if that's all right, because there's no way I could remember everything that I was wanting to ask. So I'm not going to give away all these key points of the book. I'm not going to do that. If you want to get all the good juicy stuff, you got to get the book. But there's a couple of points I would like to touch on. My first thing. Where you talk in the book, you met Eddie Van Halen in 1977 at the Whiskey, and that was the first time y'all met. So what was the vibe like? I mean, like when you met him, what was his overall demeanor? I have a feeling I know the answer, but I'd like to hear it from you because you were there. So what was it like to meet Eddie the first time?
So it's July 1977, the Whiskey A Go-Go, the famous whiskey on the Sunset Strip, where every band from Cream to Zeppelin to Allman Brothers, Humble Pie played. I mean, very, very famous club, where Van Halen had played, before they were signed. Actually, they played there several dates after they actually got signed.
Right.
So I'm there on a Friday night because Cheap Trick is recording a live record there. And I thought, wow, Cheap Trick recording at the Whiskey, that's worth seeing. So 1977 is the period of punk. I was not a punk fan. Mainly punk bands were playing at the Whiskey and a lot of the clubs around town. It just wasn't my thing, but Cheap Trick recording a live record, that was worth seeing. I was a Cheap Trick fan. So I'm there with my brother and we're waiting downstairs and there's a tap on my shoulder and it's Michelle Meyer. Michelle was the sweet, sweet woman who booked the Whiskey. She also booked a couple of clubs around town, Madame Wong's East and Madame Wong's West. Madame Wong's East was a really pretty hip club for punk bands. I mean, some really big punk bands who kind of later went on to do something like Black Flag and, a lot of those big time punk bands played Madame Wong's East. And I had gotten to know Michelle and she was just so very sweet, and she knew what was going on everywhere. Anything musically that was worth knowing, she knew about. So she taps me and she says, "Hey, there's somebody upstairs I want you to meet." And so Michelle wants me to meet somebody. There's no questions. I'm gonna meet this person.
Right.
So we walk up the stairs to the dressing rooms, the Whiskey dressing rooms upstairs. Excuse me. And the Whiskey dressing rooms are like the bottom of a garbage can. I mean, they're dirty and they stink of cigarettes, and there's empty beer cups, and there's, who knows what else is on the floor, all the bands have signed the walls, and I bet there's some pretty famous signatures up there. So we walk up, and I see this guy standing in the corner, and I keep trying to run this through my head. If I instantly recognized who it was, I'm pretty certain that I did. So you have to understand, 1977, there are no stories on Van Halen. There are no articles. There are no Cream, features, nothing in Circus. There's nothing. The only pictures you've really seen of the band are, their posters that they would put up around town.
Right.
And the other thing, which I think is key to how our friendship developed, I had never seen Van Halen perform live when I met Edward that first night, which is weird because I was at the Whiskey a lot. Even there were a lot of punk bands there. They still had a lot of rock stuff. So I was at the Whiskey at least twice a week, during the period when Van Halen were playing the Whiskey. And I was at the Starwood all the time, and I'd never seen them perform live. So I see this guy, and I'm pretty positive I recognize him. I go, thinking about, that's Eddie Van Halen. I've heard about that guy. I've heard people talking about him. So she walks me over with my brother and says, Eddie Van Halen, Steve Rosen. And he puts out his hand, we shake hands. And she goes, Steve Rosen, Eddie Van Halen, Godhead. And I had heard Michelle use that term before. And when Michelle called you Godhead, that meant she was saying, this is the greatest, this is the pinnacle of musical endeavors. It doesn't get any greater than this, If you're Godhead in Michelle's vernacular, you were.
Wow.
So it's funny because Edward smiled when she said that, meaning he knew Michelle, and he knew when she used that phrase what it meant. So I shake his hand, and obviously I hadn't planned on meeting him, and you asked what the vibe was. Instantly,
yes.
The vibe was just amazing and open and comfortable, So I said hello and how you doing, and maybe I said, oh, you're a Cheap Trick fan, and somehow we got onto Eric Clapton.
Oh.
I was a monster Clapton fan. I mean, I loved Cream. The brief work he did in the Yardbirds, the John Mayall stuff. He had some bands prior to all that. The Roosters. I mean, some of these early blues bands. So I knew a lot about Clapton. Blind Faith, of course,
Right.
solo career, which I wasn't much of a fan of, to be honest. But so.
Oh wow.
I consider myself something of a snob when it came to Eric Clapton. I mean, I typically knew more than the person I was talking to, just because I loved them and I heard him, and I've listened
Right.
to him. And so if I was talking to you and Joe, you said to me, yeah, well, Eric Clapton, didn't he, play in a band called Cream? I would immediately say, Joe, I've got to go. The phone's ringing. I would dismiss you as going, oh my God, did you really tell me? Did you really say that? So, I was a little bit of a snob in that way. And not that I wanted him to say something like that, but
Right.
I kept waiting for him to make a comment that would tell me, he really doesn't know much about Clapton. But what Edward did was his insights into Eric were way deeper than what I did. So instead of knowing the history of what he did and, all this, Edward started talking about his finger vibrato and, the long solo on I'm So Glad of Goodbye Cream. And we talk about sections and the interplay. And I mean, he understood that part, and Eric's tone. And so I thought, oh my God, this guy really knows. So at that point, I mean, I was ready to marry the guy, I mean, just was so much. Then we start talking about Jeff Beck, and I told you how much I love Jeff Beck.
Right. Right. Yeah.
He was just so open and engaged, and
Right.
And he wasn't expecting company. I mean, he didn't know that Michelle was going to come up there. He was just up there, smoking his ubiquitous cigarette. He'd always be smoking, and he was there to see Cheap Trick, So he could have just been, hey, how you doing, and made a motion as if, I want to be alone, but that never happened. And so we kept talking, and it could have been a half hour, it could have been an hour and a half. It was just amazing. I did ask him because I knew about Van Halen being signed to Warner Brothers. Everybody knew about that. They were like the first sort of local strip band to land a big time contract with a major label.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, my God, this guy, his band got signed to Warner Brothers. So again, I mentioned I was playing around town, and in no way am I trying to compare myself with him or anything like that. But I'm thinking, my God, I would have cut off a limb, just to have sat in the offices with the Warner Brothers people to play them a song. And he's got a deal. So I was thinking, my God, the band has to be amazing. He has to be an incredible guitar player. Again, I'd never heard him play. So, I asked him about that, and he goes, yeah, we got a deal. It's really good. I really like Warner's because all my favorite bands were on Warner's. He was a big Sabbath fan. Sabbath were on Warner's, Purple, right? So, him being on Warner's, it really meant something to him. And he goes, yeah, I'm really happy. And I think we made a good record, and I think it'll do okay. And that's what he says. I mean, I'll tell you, if I was in a band and my band just scored a big time deal on Warner Brothers Records, I'd say, dude, I'm on Warner Brothers Records. You're not. And don't even talk to me. You know what I mean? Like, my God, that would be alone. But he was not like that. And he was never like that.
Right.
So we're talking, and then he goes, oh, wait, I'll be right back. And he runs out of the room.
Oh.
It's like, I don't know where he's going, what's going on. If he had to go home or something. And he comes back, and he's got a pencil. And he picks up a piece of paper off the dressing room floor, and he writes something down. He hands it to me. It's a number, and I can see it's his phone number. And he goes, yeah, man, I really had a great time talking to you. Call me sometime.
Wow.
I go, yeah, man, sure. And, so you talk about the vibe. It was as if we had started this conversation in another lifetime, 10 years earlier, and we ran into each other 10 years later, and we're continuing the conversation. It was perfect. Wow. I mean, I just thought the guy was amazing. And again, having nothing to do with his playing, you know, or anything, because I didn't know how he played. Just very sweet, open, honest, self-effacing guy. And he was that same person for a very long time. That did change, and I don't want to give away the book. He did change, but for many years, he was a remarkable person.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into that either. So, but folks, if you're just tuning in or you're watching right now, we're talking with Steve Rosen, the author of Tonechaser. This book is amazing. If you're an Eddie Van Halen fan or a fan of Van Halen, all that in general, the legacy of everything, get this book. But if you want to actually hear the interviews, what Steve is talking with us tonight, get the audio version. Hell, get both. That's what I did. I got both. But you know, if you're going down the road, you can actually hear the actual interviews that he did with Eddie. And to hear that is just amazing. It's amazing. So I want to go to another question, if it's all right, Steve. I want to. I was so floored when I heard this in the book. Okay, so I'm going to skip to this part. Okay, so the second album, Van Halen 2, Eddie shows up at your house and he has 2 guitars, and you're like, what is he holding? And you thought he was holding some fish or something. Like you weren't quite sure what he was holding until you went outside and looked, and he was holding 2, I want to say Les Pauls that he had just got from like Norm's Rare Guitars or something. And he brings them into your house and he just tosses them casually on your couch, and they almost hit each other. And if you can pick it up from there, I was amazed when I heard that. I was like, what? And what goes on from there on was incredible.
Exactly. So I'm not sure if it was around the Van Halen 2 period. I can't remember my chronology. It was probably somewhere right around there, maybe after that. You know, so Edward had saved some money, and as he was wont to do, by the second record, I mean, we were pretty close friends. I mean, you know, he'd call, or I'd call him, or I'd be up at his place. You know, he was living in Valerie's house in Coldwater Canyon, or he'd come over to where I live, which is literally like 8 minutes away. I lived in Laurel Canyon. Ed was in Coldwater Canyon. So I'm in my little guest house, and there's a knock on the door, and I had a really thick screen door, and it was kind of hard to see people. You know, and they couldn't see in. You know, for like a security thing. So I'm looking, and I can see it's him, and he's holding these 2 things, and literally they look like he was just holding like animals or like fish or dead carcasses. And I thought, well, that's pretty weird. I didn't know Ed did that kind of stuff. I opened the door and I see he's got these 2 Les Pauls. No cases, he's like holding them up, by the headstock, up there. So they're dangling down. So he comes in the house, I have a couch, and he literally tosses them on the couch, and they kind of bounce around, and they really almost bump into each other.
Oh, man.
I'm looking at these guitars going, oh my God. He goes, yeah, look what I just bought, So one was I think the 58 and a 59. I mean, these guitars are beautiful. That he had just bought from Norm's Rare Guitars.
Wow.
And literally he told me, yeah, man, I just bought these. So I think, I don't know. I don't even know if he bought them, went home and then came over, or bought them and just came over. But just the fact that he would bring them over and share them with me, I mean, that wasn't lost on me, what that meant. You know what I mean? It was like,
oh yeah,
it was such a cool thing. So yeah, man, so he's got these guitars, and I'm looking at them, and I don't even want to touch them, though he wouldn't have cared. I mean, I know that, because hey, could I play that? He would have said yes. I just didn't want it, because I didn't want to put my bad, mojo on there and maybe curse him so he couldn't play anymore or something, But so they're kind of sitting there, and he's just kind of messing with them. And at the time, I had a Marshall stack. So I'm sorry. So this was probably, it could have been around that time. So side story here. I had gone to England with Niels Lozauer. Niels, a photographer.
Yeah. Yes.
Recovers. Niels, a very famous rock photographer.
Right.
Was Van Halen's official photographer on those early days. We'd gone to England for a week. We visited the Marshall factory. I met Mr. Jim Marshall, and he sold me. Actually, he would end up selling me 2 Marshall stacks.
Wow.
So I had a Marshall 100-watt stack sitting in my room, which I never used because I could never get a sound out of it. I mean, anybody else, it was an amazing amp. For me, I turned it on. It would be feedback. All I did was made my sloppiness louder. I wanted to toss him out the window. So he's looking at, and he's looking at, he goes, well, does this have a master volume? Which it didn't. I go, no. He goes, well, how do you get a sound out of it? Him asking me how to get a sound out of a Marshall, but me, going up to Da Vinci and saying, which end of the paintbrush should I use? I couldn't even believe he had asked that. So I'm trying to say, well, I think if you turn there's like a master volume. I don't know what happened. All I know is he takes his hand literally, and goes across the top. Right? Everything's cranked to 10.
Yeah.
One of the Marshalls, right? I give him a strap. He cranks at the Marshall, and he starts playing, and he plays for about 20 seconds. And for those of you who don't have the audiobook, to me, that is worth the price of the book to hear him blazing through that Marshall, my Marshall, and his Les Paul for like 20
You ain't
seconds.
kidding.
It's just the most amazing thing. And man, so he was there and just didn't. Yeah, for him they were tools. I think he bought them. Well, he ended up touring with the one guitar, so couldn't have been that precious to him. I think he looked at them a little bit as investments, but he really never looked at gear that way. They were meant to be played. And he just, he was proud of them, justifiably so, brought them over. And it was...
Well, to me, when he came over with those guitars, he just showed up at your house. To me, that says that y'all's friendship was like official. Not that it wasn't before, but that just, he came over there and just said, hey, man, I want to hang. Yeah. And it's just, I know that had to put you over the moon. It would me, and just, it's like, wow, he's over here hanging out and we're going to jam and talk and do whatever. And he shows you the finger tapping. He shows you that. He shows you, here's what I'm doing. He shows you that what he's doing. And I was like, oh my God, that's the thing that everybody is trying to figure out back in the day. And he sits there and shows you how to do it. And then you learn how to do it. And I was like, that's incredible, man. He shows you that in your house. I was like, wow. That's amazing.
Was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. And that was in that chapter called How to Play Like Eddie Van Halen in One Not So Easy. That was a different time. Yeah, man. He just came over one day. Or that may have been where we were scheduled to do an interview, where he would come over, or I go up to his place. Yeah, but he came over and he brought one of the Frankenstrat's. I don't know if it was the Frankenstrat, but then he had some Kramers, I think.
Right.
And he'd start playing, and I had a couple of guitars, and somehow I picked up a guitar, and I can't even believe I did that, but I must have done that, and again in the in the interest of all honesty, and I write about in the book, we'd get we'd do drugs and get high, and it was fun, man. It was a lot of fun. So I was probably a little bit wrecked, I thought, I'm going to pick up a guitar. I'm going to play guitar with Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah, so, why not?
Man? He's playing stuff, and I asked him because, I knew how he did the tapping thing, but his tapping, it had like that triplet feel. It wasn't da-da-da. It was, and I could go da-da-da-da-da, and I could get going fast, but it never, ever felt like that. So I asked him, that's when he tried to explain. He goes, well, it depends where you're counting one. And, he's telling me these things just like, what the fuck is he talking about? And I wasn't going to say that to him. I'm sitting there and I'm doing it and it's wrong. Yeah. In the meantime, he's playing.
Right.
It's wrong. I get it right one time. I accidentally stumble over it. And he goes, yeah, that's it.
There you go.
But I mean, that's, again, you talk about him, he could have said, no, man, it's not like that. It's like this. And he could have been very gentle with it. But any admonition from him would have been, it would have, it would have paralyzed. Maybe a better guitar player, not so much, even though I think any guitar player would, sitting there, if Edward says, no, man, you're doing it wrong, it's like, would have felt embarrassed, But he never did that, He was a really unbelievable teacher. So, he would sit there, and then he heard me do it right there one time. He goes, yeah, that's it. In his mind, he also understood what his comment to me would mean to me. I mean, it's not like he thought, oh, well, if I say Steve did it good, he'll think, oh, he's really good. You know what I mean? We're talking about a microsecond of thought, but I believe that he understood what that would mean to me, and he was amazing like that. He was always like that. He was always supportive, and if I was feeling a little bit, blue or blasé, he was always, uplifting, and he would never say, oh, come on, man, don't be an idiot, don't be an asshole. I mean, he never talked like that, So, I think we were good friends, and I mean, I tried to be there for him, He was Edward Van Halen, and, was the greatest guitar player in the world and had a lot of money and a beautiful wife and a big house, but he still had problems, he still had things that depressed him, and, we tried to be, I tried to be as, comforting as I could, and, that's what friends do, right? So.
Okay, that's incredible. I want to hit a couple of these comments, if that's okay. We got, from what I understand, a couple people talking about your book. Mr. Martin chimes in. He says, I loved reading Tonechaser. Shipping to Canada is a little expensive, but every dollar was well worth it. Thank you, Steve. Absolutely. That's awesome.
Hey, Martin, I appreciate that, man. Shipping rates to Canada went up incredibly. I forget what the cost was to Canada. It's like 45 or 50 bucks. I think I could ship a book to the UK for like $10 more. So for some reason, Canada got really expensive. But man, I really appreciate that. And I had been trying to find somebody in Canada to sort of act as like a de facto distributor. Somebody there who I could ship books to, who could take orders for Canadian fans. I had somebody in Europe doing that for me, and I have my friend Adam Roach who continues to do that for me in Australia. But yeah, man, I appreciate that, man. I'm glad to hear that it was worth the money. Thanks, man.
And if anybody wants to completely save on shipping altogether, just get the audio version. Yeah, and you'll have it right away. Yeah, and you can also do that if you want. Like I said, get both. I mean, it's awesome. Mr. Ricky Hull chimes in, my fellow truck driving friend. He says, I'm going to get the audio version. So there you go, Steve. He's going to get the audio book.
Very cool, man. mysoundwise.com. Just download the app, and then I think you just type in Tonechaser, or you'll automatically kind of see the Tonechaser audiobook. And $39.99, and I tried to price it, kind of reasonably. And yeah, man, I think you're really gonna love it. All these things that I'm talking about, that it takes me, 4 pages in the book to describe Edward noodling around. Well, now you're gonna hear that.
That's what I love about the audio version. It just comes to life. I mean, everything is there. The way Eddie talks, the way how laid back he is, and he's noodling on a guitar unplugged, and it's just incredible. But let me get to this comment. Mr. Ted Fair, he's off the left coast as well. Steve, he says, Ted Fair says, good evening, gentlemen. I had the pleasure of to buy Mr. Rosen's book at the OC Vibe Guitar Festival a few weeks back in Anaheim. What a true gentleman and talented journalist.
Oh,
there you go.
Ted, I remember you coming by, man.
Ted is a super nice guy, man. Ted is really, really nice. He comes on the show from time to time, and what a laid-back, gentle soul he is. Oh, very nice guy. Very nice. Talking about Eddie bringing over the 58 and 59 Les Pauls, Andy Dion in the chat says, "Wow, at 58 and 59, those are worth a ton of money now." Yeah, big time.
Yeah, they are. You
Big
know,
time.
I believe that one of them, I don't know which one, was sold through a broker in New York, I think to somebody in Japan, and the other
Oh,
one,
wow.
I'm not sure, but I can tell you what Edward paid for those, and it might be off a little bit. I think he paid $4,500 for one and $5,500 for the other.
Wow.
But this, you know, so this is back in, again, it's in the book, early '80s, mid '80s. That's a lot of money back then. But yeah, what those cars will be worth now, I mean.
Oh man, forget about it. Yeah.
You know.
All right. Let's see. Let me look at my notes. Oh, here's one that I've also you're I guess journalism professor in college. Wow, he was something, wasn't he? Wow. He was just really rude.
He was
savage. He just gave you a hard time all the way around, and finally you said, "You know what? F you, dude. I'm out." And I like how you said in the book, he's still sitting there using that red pen grading papers, and I'm out here with rock stars. I was like, there you go.
Exactly. You know, and the truth about why I went to UCLA, I mean, it wasn't my first choice. I mean, it was an amazing school. My dad was a monster Bruins basketball fan. He loved the Bruins, right? Lou Alcindor and Walton. You know, I mean, my dad was a pretty even-keeled guy. He'd watch every Bruins game that were on TV, and if they lost, I've never seen my dad upset. He would start cussing. He was so invested in the team. So honestly, I wanted to try to go there because I thought if I go there, I might be able to get him tickets to the basketball games. And that's why I ended up going to UCLA. And I did get him. We did actually go to some games. So that's why I was at UCLA. Yeah, along the way, I run into this monstrous English teacher, you know, who was critical of me and didn't like me and, you know, said some pretty nasty things to me. So I left UCLA at the end of that year. I don't even know if I finished the year. And I think I got an F in his class or a D. And I said, yeah, fuck you, you know. And, you know, youth is pig-headed, right? You don't know that you're not supposed to go out and bang your head against the wall. You know, you just go ahead and do it. You don't think about it. And so, yeah, I finished UCLA and went to Europe that summer with a buddy. I actually made some connections in Europe. And I came back and I started, you know, doing little things like I was telling you, little local newspapers. I would do little record reviews. And, you know, it just kind of grew from there. So, yeah, maybe the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't know. I mean, part of me wishes I had a journalism degree. You know, would it have made me a better writer? I don't know, man. They say, you know, you take writing classes, it improves your writing. Like if you take art classes, you become a better artist. I suppose, you know, technique, and I would have learned, you know, I don't know, different sentence structures or more complex, you know, grammar. But I mean, you know, I've always thought, you know, either you're a guitar player or you aren't a guitar player. You know, if you're going to GIT, I mean, you're probably a pretty good guitar player to begin with. You know, yes, you're being schooled and it's that discipline. I understand that. But, you know, guys who went to GIT, I mean, Satriani or Steve Vai or Paul Gilbert. I mean, look, I'm sure Paul Gilbert was an amazing guitar player walking into GIT. Did that turn him into an extraordinary guitar player? Maybe. You know, they had some great teachers there, you know. Yeah, and had the teacher been really supportive and had I, you know, had they really taken time and said, hey, man, you know, if you just do this, I go, oh, you know, but as it was, he was, you know.
He must have been miserable, Steve. He must have been miserable. He must have been a miserable human being because he just had it out for you for whatever reason. I would like you to touch on this story briefly, not give nothing away. I mean, I'm not that I'm saying give something away, but the story blew my mind. If you feel like touching on this again, folks, we're talking to Steve Rosen, the author of Tonechaser. Get your copy today. Look in the description below this live feed, and you will see links for the book and for the audiobook. We got people in the chat. You done sold it to some people, Steve. They're jumping in there and getting it. So here we go. We got and that's what we're wanting to do. Wanting to get the word out there. Andy Dion chimes in. He says, I'm getting the audiobook for sure now. And Martin says, he says, just the anecdote that we can hear Ed playing on Steve's amp has already convinced me that I'm going to buy the audiobook. There you go. That's what I'm saying.
You listen to that and tell me it's not the most unbelievable thing you've ever heard, right? You know, so just imagine that amp, that Marshall cranked to 10. Laurel Canyon's a very quiet place. I have all these pictures on the walls. It is so freaking loud. I mean, the pictures are falling off the walls. You know, people must have thought it was the end of the world. So just try to remember that as you're listening to it. And I wanted to mention one thing here, Joe, if I could. So,
sure.
So the audiobook, if you get the audiobook alone, it's $39.99. If you've already bought the hardback, as a small thank you to you people, it's $29.99. And if you want to get the hardback and the audiobook, it's $79.99. So just wanted to let you know.
Nice. All right. So there's a deal, folks. If you want to get both, you save some money. Ricky Hull just said, I just tried to get it, but I'm going to have to wait till after the show because he's enjoying the show. And I personally know Ricky, so his word is good as gold. He said, but I'm definitely going to get the book so I can listen to it as I drive into the night. Thank you, Ricky. Appreciate that, man. Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much, man. My next question, man, I have that blew my mind when I was checking out the book. The whole Richie Blackmore thing. I've heard so many things about, in the magazines through the years, Richie Blackmore, how his demeanor is like a roller coaster. Like he can be okay, and then the next time he's just a complete, not a very pleasant person. And so you decide to introduce Eddie and Richie backstage during the show, and then can you take it from there, please?
So I knew Edward was a big Blackmore fan. Richie Blackmore's Rainbow is coming to the Long Beach Arena. Long Beach is about 50 miles from where Edward and I lived. So at first I thought, I'm getting tickets, and I had passes. I had backstage passes. I thought, wow, I bet Ed would like to go to the show. So I thought, how cool to go to see, Richie Blackmore with Edward Van Halen. It was more that it was partly because it would be amazing to go with him, but there was the journalist in me also thought, this could be a cool moment. Maybe later on it would be something to write about. Journalists, young new guitar player to see the classic veteran. So those things were going through my mind. And then I thought, well, my God, what if I could introduce Edward to Richie? And I thought that would be historic. That could be monumental. I'm going to backtrack 1 second here. I did not know Edward had never met Richie, but he did run into him. I think that Richie, and I've heard conflicting stories that Richie was at the Whiskey, Richie was at Gazzari's. So this is early on. This is before they're signed. That Richie was out one night. He was on the strip with John Bonham. And there somewhere, I think it was Gazzari's. And Edward was a huge Zeppelin fan. He recognizes Richie Blackmore. He recognizes Bonham. Walks over to say hello, and they treat him like shit. Fuck you. We don't want to talk to you. John Bonham is as mean-spirited as Richie could be. John Bonham could be a really, really mean guy.
Man, so, that's horrible.
Right. I did not know that when I invited Edward along. He never told me. I didn't know that. So we go down to the show, and he drove. He had a Jeep. And so we get down there, and there's no parking. By the time we get there, the first act, John Cougar had gone on. So the parking lot was filled up. So he pulls up on this little grass median, and there's a sign that he almost runs into the sign. No parking, car will be towed. I go, Edward. He goes, fuck it. I thought, you know? I mean, it's like, what better story can I have than going to a concert and having the car towed away? You know, it wasn't my car. So he leaves the car, you know. So Joe and John Cougar had already finished. Next up was Randy Hansen. Randy was that Hendrix imitator back in the day.
Yes. Yes.
He was really. I mean,
he's still touring today too.
What's that?
Yeah, he's still playing today. Yeah.
You know, he had all the gear, man. He had the, you know. Period correct amps, you know, and the you know, the was, and you know. So we're waiting for him to come on, and I'll just sidetrack just a little bit here. So we sat down, and we had good seats. You know, as a press person, you know, the label, you know, couldn't stick you up in the bleachers because, you know, you're like, well, we can't stick him in the bleachers. He's going to write a bad review, so we got to give him good tickets, good seats. You know?
There you
go.
So
it's a good band. They were like, I don't know, 10, 20 rows back in the middle. I mean, they were very good seats. So we go to sit down, and literally within, I want to say 1 minute, we sit down, and I look around, and I can see people, I can see guys leaning over going, you know, I can see it, man. It's like a Pied Piper, and I'm looking around, and I can feel it growing. Edward was oblivious, you know, and maybe he was used to that. I don't know. But 2 minutes later, there's a line of people. Eddie, sign my ticket. Eddie, you know, sign my breast, you know, whatever. And he was cool for a while. Ed didn't like those kinds of scenes. I was with him at NAMM shows where that's all it was. He'd be at a Kramer booth, and they'd line up, and he would go batshit crazy. He did not like it. So I could tell at a point in time he'd had enough. And so I said, hey, you know, guys, you know, we're going to sit down and watch a show. And people were totally respectful of that, you know, and they sat back down. And it's funny, you know, Ed could have kicked the shit out of me. I mean, he was a wiry guy, man, but I have no doubt he was a pretty tough guy, could have taken care of himself. But I kept thinking, you know, if anybody comes toward him, you know, I'm going to have to, I felt like I had to protect him somehow. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it never happened. No one was there to hurt him. They loved him. But, you know, there could have been some whack job who was drinking, blah, blah, blah. So we're sitting there waiting. The lights go down. We're waiting for Randy Hansen to come on. Well, Richie Blackmore comes on. And I'm looking at Ed going, I understand. Was not Richie Blackmore headlining? Richie Blackmore comes on. Second build. The lights go up, and we go backstage. Edward knew Randy. Randy had gone to the Whiskey like a week before, and they had met each other. So we went back, and there's a famous photo in the book that does Neil Slozauer took. We're backstage there with me, Edward, and Randy. That Neil took, and so they're talking and stuff, and I go, Randy, what's going on? And he goes, oh well, you know, I played some shows with Richie up in Oakland, I think it was, and he was afraid to go on after me, and I don't know what the truth is, but I had seen hundreds of shows by that time, and I'd never seen the headline act go on second and let the middle act headline. Right. So I really don't think too much about it. Randy comes on, and he plays really well. And then afterwards, there's this after-hours party at the Queen Mary, which is the famous, you know, ocean liner that was no longer in service, but it was there. You know, you could have weddings on it, and they had, you know, banquet rooms. I mean, it was beautiful, you know, and that's where this after party was for Richie Blackmore. And, you know, I told Edward, hey, man, you know, you want to meet Richie? You know, before we got down to the show, I said, hey, man, I kind of know Richie. You know, I could introduce you. He goes, yeah, that'd be great, you know. So we drive over to the Queen Mary, which is only like 5 minutes from the Long Beach Arena. And we park, we get out, and, you know, we're walking in, and there's a guy with a clipboard, and then this thought goes through my head. I'm going, oh, my God, what if my name's not on the list? I go, how freaking embarrassing would that be? I'm here with Edward Van Halen. I can't get us, you know. So these things run through my head. That's how I work. You know, I would look at those things, and I was so aware of who I was with that, you know, it's like I couldn't be real comfortable. But so we get there, and he looks down and goes, oh yeah, Steve Rosen +1. So I'm on the list. So we walk in. It then dawned on me that Richie was probably in a foul mood. It only struck me when we were there at the party that if he was willing to go on second, how upset could he have been? Pretty upset, right? So now I'm thinking, maybe this isn't the smartest thing to do. Maybe I should save this for another time. So I'm looking around, and I don't see him. So we go over to the bar, you know, we get some drinks, we're drinking, and I'm looking around, and I'm going, maybe he's not going to show up. Please, God, don't let him show up.
Oh, boy.
I'm looking around, and I look over and I go, oh, my God, there he is. I'm thinking, maybe Ed will drink enough that he won't recognize him. And I wasn't going to say anything, and I'm going, well, God, I got to say something. Oh, there's Richie. Want to go over? And Edward said, yeah. So I walk over, and Richie kind of looks at me, and I had just interviewed him for the cover of Guitar Player magazine. And you referenced earlier, Joe, how Richie on any given day could be a monster or a...
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
During that Guitar Player interview, he was really cool, man. I think he realized that this is the cover of Guitar Player magazine, and yes, he was Richie Blackmore. Still, you don't want to piss off the guy writing the story, right? So
right. That's right.
It was a really good interview. He was really open, you know. He was not sarcastic or fighting. He was very cool. So we're walking over, and I think Richie kind of recognized me because it only happened, I think the interview only happened a few months earlier. So walking over, and I kind of make eye contact with him, and I see him kind of looking at this, you know, the guy standing next to me, and I can't tell if he recognizes him. So I walk over, and I go, hi, Richie, you know, Steve Rosen, guitar player. He goes, yeah, hi, you know. And I'm going, yeah, so Richie, this is, and before I can finish my sentence, he gives Edward the stink eye, you know, the Richie Blackmore grin, and goes, I know you. Don't you play guitar?
Oh, man.
Oh, my God. Did he really say that to Edward? Man. And I'm looking at Edward to see how he responds, and Ed's kind of neutral. Can you imagine, you know, I mean, look, Edward, you know, by this time, you know, it's like 78. I mean, so Edward he's a rising star. He's still not huge, but still, you know, he's a pretty big, everybody knows him, you know. But still, for him to meet Richie Blackmore, still, that's a pretty big thing. That's a pretty big step up. You know, but can you imagine, you know, meeting your hero and he says that to you? My God, it was, to me,
that's devastating. Yeah.
You know, I'd run and hide for a year. So I looked at Edward, he was kind of neutral about it, you know, but I knew how much it hurt him. So, you know, they make small talk, you know, and they say a few things, and we're walking away, and, you know, I go, Edward, I am so sorry. And he doesn't really say anything. I knew how much that hurt him, you know. And so on the drive home, I'm thinking, my God, what do I even say to the guy? How do I apologize to him? What a mistake. Now, this is because, remember, again, I did not know that he had sort of had that encounter with Richie earlier. Had I known about that, I would have never have made the offer to have introduced him. I mean, I did. I just didn't. Or maybe I would have. I would have rolled the dice, but I probably wouldn't have. So we drive home in silence, and, you know, such as it is. And I'm thinking, my God, he's going to be pissed at me, you know. And so, you know, I'm thinking, you know, the next day, do I call him, you know? But I think a day went by, and it wasn't odd where a day would go by, or 2 days, or a week. You know, we wouldn't talk to each other. It wasn't that kind of a friendship. You know, he was always working. He was always writing. When he was on the road, I mean, he'd be gone for 8 months out of the year. So you know, maybe a couple of days went by, and he called, or I called, you know, and I'm waiting to hear him say something like, why did you do that? Why would you introduce me, you know? And it was just a non-event, and he never brought it up again. And I never brought it up again. So that was Richie Blackmore, you know. All that being said, you know, Richie is one of the in my mind, I don't think Richie ever got the acclaim he should have. I mean, when you talk about the greatest guitar players, his name is never mentioned with those guys. Right? It's always Hendrix and Page and Beck and Clapton. You know.
I'm guessing because of his maybe his attitude, maybe kind of put that kind of dark cloud over his glory, I guess.
There was a huge part of it, you know, and plus he went through so many musicians working with different bands, which is his right. Yeah. But you know, people don't like to see that. You know, people, you know, if you're in a band, they want to see the same guys. But yeah, so. But an amazing guitar player. I mean, wrote some of the greatest riffs of all times. But
absolutely, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're first starting to play guitar, especially when I was coming up, one of the things you would hear in the guitar store. Now, this is a running joke nowadays, but back then it was a real thing. If you were just starting to play guitar, you either heard somebody play the first opening riff of "Smoke on the Water." Or intro to Stairway or something like that. You know, that's just how it was when I was coming up. I don't know what it is now, but speaking of Zeppelin, I wrote this down because I had to wow. I mean, not to go off the beaten path here, but if you could just touch on this for a couple of minutes. You actually spent some time with Led Zeppelin in a jet and doing some interviews and stuff, and I was like. When I heard the story, again, folks, we're talking with Steve Rosen here, the author of Tonechaser. And if you want to check out these stories for yourself, look in the description below. You'll find links to the hardback cover edition of Tonechaser and the audio version as well. If you get both, there is a deal there if you want to get both, which is amazing. Yeah, Steve, you actually spent some time, I mean, not only with so many other heavy hitters of guitar, but, I mean, you actually spent some time on the road with Led Zeppelin doing some interviews. Can you briefly touch on that, please? I mean, that blew my mind.
1977, I'd been writing for Guitar Player for about 4 years, 3.5 years at that point. And I think I may have brought it up. I go, you know, what about a story on Jimmy Page? They go, you get the story, we'll put it on the cover. Wow. So I started calling Swan Song, right, their label.
Right.
And Janine Safer was the publicist there. They were in New York. And I would call and say, Janine, man, I've got a cover story assignment from Guitar Player for Jimmy. You know, I'm sure that they would use a big feature on John Paul Jones. Can we do this? And the response was, listen, man, they don't like journalists. You know, they don't bring writers on the road. Writers always, you know, tell them, oh, how much we love you. And then they write garbage in the press. So she goes, I don't think that's going to happen. But I was persistent. I kept at it. And I want to say I called, well, I certainly called for months. I might have called over the course of a year, really. I mean, I was going to make this happen. You know, I was going to beat her down into submission. And, you know, I think, there you go. I think either I called or maybe she had called me, goes, hey, man, look, I got a thumbs up. I got a yes. You can go with them. Wow. 77 is the Presence tour, I think, right? So what they would do is, and this is Peter Grand, and it was genius. So they were so big by then, you know, for them to have to go in, check into an airport, stand in line for tickets, you know, get hotels in cities. That was becoming too much. So Peter Grand had the brilliant idea. We're going to lease our own jet. We can base in one city and we can fly out to these dates, you know, these concerts that are close enough to reach in an hour in a plane. I mean, right, that plane's going 600 miles an hour. So, you know, how many cities are there close enough to Chicago that are 600 miles away or 700 or 800 miles? I mean, a lot of them, right? So they were based in Chicago, the Drake Hotel. I remember that, this beautiful hotel. They had their jet parked on the you know, the private tarmac of O'Hare, and so they go to a gig. The gig was at 7 o'clock that night. They take the limousines over to the private tarmac, get under their private plane, fly, land at the private tarmac in whatever city they were in, limousine to the gig, get done with the gig, get back in the limousine, go back to their private tarmac, fly back to Chicago, and drive back to the Drake. It was unbelievable. I mean, it must have cost a shitload of money. I mean, to lease your own jet. But, I mean, imagine how much easier it was. So, yeah, so they finally said yes. I'm at the Drake Hotel. They told me, don't leave your hotel room. We don't know when Jimmy will want to talk. If you're not in your hotel room when we call, we don't know what will happen. So literally, I think it was 3 days, I was stuck in this hotel room. Beautiful hotel room, you know. I kept ordering room service. I remember once, I thought, I've got to go outside. I want to say at least I walked around Chicago for 10 minutes. I remember going outside, and I think I got like a Colonel Sanders and some Winchell's donuts and brought him back to the room. And, praying that, that red light wasn't blinking on the phone.
Oh,
so, I sit around, I watch TV, and, it's like I was a captive, prisoner in paradise. And, finally the phone rings, and Jimmy will talk to you, So there's a knock at my door, and there's 2 monster-sized bouncers.
Oh.
It was like Dead Man Walking, One of them in front of me in the middle, and one behind me. Like they had to, as if I was going to get to the room and attack Jimmy Page or something, So we get to the room, and they say, yeah, he's in here, and he had obviously they all had the suites up on the higher floor.
Right.
So I knock on the door, and he opens the door, and I walk in, and the first thing I see is there's a huge hole in the wall. There's plaster all over the rug, and there's a phone like in pieces on the rug. And I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at him, and he's not saying anything. And I'm sure I'm going to bring it up. And I'm going, God, what the hell? And then, he says, oh, well, a fucking phone, if you leave it on, it rings, so you take it off and it makes a buzzing sound. There's only one thing to do, rip it out of the wall. I don't know if those were the exact words, but just threw it out of the wall and threw it against the wall.
Wow.
So we sit down, and I wanted to explain to him what the interview was. I go, Jimmy, this is for guitar players, right? So the magazine is for guitar players. So we're going to talk about your gear and, details and be specific, and I mean, I think he understood, I don't know. So I start talking, and I had done my homework, man. I knew a lot about Page and those early sessions. I was asking about all those early guitars, and it was going really well. And then he walks into the bathroom, and he comes back out, and he was pretty fucked up when I opened the door, but he was, legible, he was coherent.
Right.
He came out, and I don't know what he did. I don't want to know, but he was really fucked up. So he comes back out, and we're sitting on the edge of the bed, and Jimmy talks about this loud, and you can't hear what he said. I'll go, so I'm trying to, and I've got my microphone, I've basically got it stuck up, inside his throat, to pick it up, and I'm really hearing. Plus, he's got this very thick Birmingham accent. I can't understand anything he's saying. I'm going, yeah, right, Jimmy, right.
Lord.
So we keep talking. We hit a magic moment, and this is the moment I've always tried to reach when I'm doing interviews. So you're interviewing anybody. You're walking in, interviewer and interviewee. If you hit all the right buttons at a point in time, and I can sense it because I've done enough interviews where there's a point where that person on the other side isn't the interviewee, he's just sort of a buddy, and you're talking about guitars and music. And I can tell,
right.
I could tell, and I go, I got it with him,
Yes,
at that point,
yes.
It's just too, and now you can talk about anything, and they want to talk. So at one point, he says, you know what? This really is an important interview. We're going to do this right. We're going to go into everything. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be the greatest Jimmy Page interview that's ever been done. I really believed that. One, he never did that many interviews anyway. And two, he never did that many, or if any, of those types of interviews where it was guitar centric, where it's talking about gear and amps and recording techniques.
Right.
So there were other interviews where we talk about songwriting or, you know, what shoes he was wearing, blah, blah, blah. But that was a pretty specific kind of interview. So I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. But as we kept going, I could tell he was getting a little more fucked up, you know. And with Jimmy, it was always like he was on edge. And I'd ask a question and he'd answer it, but it would be like he'd be a little belligerent, as if the question was, you know, why did you ask me that? Or, you know, it just got weird. And at one point he's talking about, yeah, that was the, you know, Les Paul I used on a song. You know, I go, oh, Jimmy, I'm sorry. Wasn't that the Telecaster? He goes, oh yeah, right. So now I'm telling him what kind of guitars he's playing. You know, that's not a good sign. But we got through, you know, and we probably talked for about 45 minutes. And, I mean, it was good, you know. Excuse me. I mean, I literally had probably 30 pages of typewritten notes, right? No computers.
Wow.
I mean, you know, and we'd gotten through like 4 pages. Yeah. So I had so much more to do. I'm thinking, okay, it's part one. This is fantastic. So I believe it was that night or maybe the next night. So I'm on the plane. I would be in a limo by myself. You know, they drive me to the private runway.
Tarmac.
You know, I'd get on the plane. And the plane, I mean, my God, it's like no plane you've ever been on, that I've ever been on. You know, instead of like, they had like these lounge areas, like separate lounges, like these big overstuffed seats. You know, there was a waitress, you know, 2 waitresses. I mean, very fine looking waitresses, you know, as you can imagine. You know, an open bar from the minute you stepped on the plane, you know.
Right.
I'm sure you could have had food if you wanted it, you know. There was snacks. In the back, they had bedrooms. These guys had their own bedrooms. John Paul Jones had an organ in one of the rooms. So it was amazing. It was Caesar's Chariot. It was the plane they used at Caesar's in Vegas for high rollers. So you can imagine. I mean, it was amazing. So I'm sitting there, and so the next, I'm sorry. Before that, I'm sorry, it was hard to remember. So before that, I interviewed John Paul Jones. So before the Page interview, 2 days in, I interviewed John Paul Jones, and he was amazing. We talked for 2 hours. He's totally into it. He's totally sober. You know, he did a lot of sessions. Something that people don't realize is that he actually crossed paths with Jimmy Page. Jimmy was a big session guy. John Paul Jones was a big session guy. They actually met for the first time, right, in some of those sessions. So we're talking, it's amazing. And you could just tell how much he loves Zeppelin, how much he loves being the bass player in Led Zeppelin. When I got there, and I realized I'm sidetracking here, there's so many pieces here. Guitar Player had put together sort of a compilation of stories called Rock Guitarist Volume 1. On the cover was that Jeff Beck story I told you about. They put that on the cover. And I had about 4 or 5 other interviews in there. I think Joe Walsh, I think Ronnie Wood was in there. So I thought, you know what? This is going to be like my peace offering. I'm going to give one to, Jimmy and John Paul Jones. Is like, hey guys, I've done some things. I'm not just a goofball. I kind of know a little bit about what I'm doing here,
Right.
So I'd given one to John Paul Jones. So we're on the plane. So the interview with John Paul Jones is amazing. So it's the next day. They have a gig. We're on the plane, and we're flying. I think we're flying to the gig, or maybe we're flying back. It's hard to remember. So now, on top of Jimmy being a little fucked up, being a little, his accent, him talking in a very quiet voice, there's now the white noise of a fucking jet. And I'm trying to hear him, I can't hear fucking anything, I at the microphone, I'm thinking, my God, you're not gonna pick up anything on this, So I'm sitting there, and there's kind of a tap on my shoulder. I'm talking to Jimmy Page. Oh, at that, Janine, when we're flying, says, "Oh, Jimmy, we'll talk to you now. You can get 20 minutes." And I realized that's what it was going to be. 45 minutes here, 20 minutes here. I was happy with that. I'll do it in pieces. So I'm talking to him, and there's a pat on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's John Paul Jones, and I think he's just wanting to say hello because we had such a great time,
Right.
and he sees that I'm interviewing Jimmy, and it's kind of like he's saying, "Yeah, man, you're going to do a cool job." I mean, I really felt that from him. We really got along really well. And so I'm kind of, I turned back around to Jimmy, and I got the microphone, and we're, microphone, we're over here. You know what I mean? So we're talking, and the pat's a little more severe, and I turn around, and he's standing there, and he's got his two bouncers. They all have their own bouncers, right?
Oh,
and each one is bigger than the other. So, I turn around, and I kind of stand up, and, I don't know what he's, what this is, and he goes, first words out of his mouth, he goes, "You fucking cunt bastard, I'm going to fucking kill you."
What?
And I'm thinking, this is the Zeppelin goof on the journalist, right? He's saying that. He knows that we got along. I'm interviewing Jimmy. He's giving the writer a hard time, So I kind of laugh, and he goes, "There's nothing fucking funny. You're a fucking asshole."
Oh, man.
And now he's getting more serious. And I'm thinking, what is going on? And I'm standing there, and I'm paralyzed. So I'm there on Led Zeppelin's plane trying to interview Jimmy Page, and John Paul Jones is ripping me a new one. It's like, I'm looking for the nearest exit. I want to jump out the door. Right? It's like in my worst nightmare,
Out of play.
I'm standing there, and I cannot figure it. And I look in his hand, and rolled up, it looks like he's got something rolled up, and I'm looking at it going, and it hit me. I go, "Oh my God, what have I done?" That Jeff Beck story that I told you was on the cover, the first story I ever wrote for Guitar Player, I suppose I was trying to make a name for myself. So I was being a little bit, I was exaggerating. The opening paragraph I had written, of the three great English guitar players, Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, and Jimmy Page. Jeff Beck, because what Jeff Beck story. Jeff Beck is the only one who still plays great. Eric Clapton, he was in his solo career, turned into a country hillbilly. I forget what I said. And Jimmy Page did nothing more than rip off the first Jeff Beck record. They covered the same song, "You Shook Me." I had totally forgotten I had written that. And my brother used to tell me, "You better be careful what you write, because one of these days, the person you're writing about is going to read it, and it's going to come back to you." I go, "Yeah, I'm right. Like, that's going to happen." And I realized in that moment, after we had done the interview, he was looking through the Jeff Beck story, because he knew Jeff Beck.
Man.
Mickey Most, who's the producer, produced Jeff's singles, produced other artists, Donovan, that John Paul Jones produced. Sunshine, Superman, a lot of famous Donovan songs. John Paul Jones did those amazing productions. So he was interested in the Jeff Beck story. So he reads that after me sitting there saying to him, "I'm so honored to be here with you and Jimmy." And I was. I was totally blown away. I wrote that thing 4 years ago.
Oh, man.
I looked at that, and at the moment I'm going, my God, he's going to take a swing at me, And honestly, I wasn't that afraid of John Paul Jones. He was kind of a, diminutive English guy. I thought I could take him. But as soon as I rear back, these bouncers are going to rip my head off, right?
Right.
So he said, "You're fucking not doing any interviews. Give me all the tapes." Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to argue with him? So the tape that I was doing with Jimmy Page, and I'd done I'd filled up a couple tapes with him, the other tape with Page. I handed him over.
Dang.
We land. Janine Safer, the publicist, is on the plane. She sees everything that's going on. I think Jimmy was like oblivious. He never said a word. It's not like, "Well, aren't we doing an interview?" It's like the interview just ended and he never said anything. So who knows?
Wow.
So I sit back down and I'm thinking, I've got to get out of here. It's going to be a bad vibe everywhere now. Because I was scheduled, I could have stayed on the road probably another week with him. I should not have bailed. I should have stayed, but I told Janine, we land. I go, Janine, you saw what happened. I go, I don't even know what to say. I'm so embarrassed. I can't even think anymore. Guitar players they're gonna go insane when they hear what happened. I'm gonna lose my gig with them. Blah blah blah. She goes, go to John Paul Jones' room and apologize to him. I go, I can't. I can't. Go apologize to him. So I muster up my courage, and I go find his room. By now it's like 4 a.m. I figure he's still up. So I gently knock on the door, and he opens the door, and he's fucking furious.
Man.
I don't even know what to say to you. I'm so embarrassed. I wrote that 4 years ago. It meant nothing. I think that the band is amazing. I am so honored. I can't apologize enough to you. He hands me back the tapes. He says, I think you're a fucking piece of shit, but you have a job to do, and I can respect that.
Dang.
I mean, if I was in his shoes, I wouldn't have given the tapes back.
Wow.
I mean, I insulted him. I lied to him.
Man.
Fast forward, I did. I left the next morning. I found the earliest flight back to California. I wrote the story. Even though I didn't do the complete interview, I went with Jimmy Page. It was a really good interview. I wasn't completely satisfied, but it came out really well. Guitar player loved it. They put it on the cover. The response was amazing from people who read it.
Wow.
They're in town. John Paul Jones is in town. Detective is playing at the Starwood. Detective was one of the bands that they signed a Swan Song, and John Paul Jones is in town. I'm at the Starwood. There's a club upstairs called the VIP room. Press people go up there. There's really nothing. It was just kind of a separate space. So I'm there with my brother. Mick was a big Detective fan, and I'm sitting there, and Mick goes, and I told my brother this story, and he goes, "Oh, John Paul Jones is sitting over there." I go, "Yeah, that's really funny." He goes, "He's standing up." I go, "Yeah, you're hilarious." He goes, "He's walking over here." I feel the tap on my shoulder. I turn around. This John Paul Jones. I'm thinking, oh my God, please don't let him yell at me.
Not again.
So I stand up, and he puts out his hand and shakes his head. He goes, "Man, I'm sorry."
Oh,
you're sorry. He goes, "I read this story, and the story that I did with him was really, really good. It was a really good story because I read the story. It was amazing. I'm sorry I reacted like that. My God, you're sorry." And we hugged, and
wow.
Can you believe that? So, yeah, man, that was my Zeppelin story. It was amazing. I mean, they were kings of the world back then.
Absolutely.
Like I said, I wish I'd stayed longer. I think I was on the road for 11 days. But that was amazing. Of all the stories I've ever written, and I've written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories, that Jimmy Page story gets more response from people than any story I've ever written.
Wow.
Wow. I'll name a list of people I think that are cool that they get up on. Yeah, I've interviewed, Edward Van Halen and Richie Blackmore and Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson and, Peter Frampton and Bon Jovi and, 10 years after and Jimmy Page. You interviewed Jimmy Page and it's amazing. It's amazing.
Wow.
But, yeah.
Amazing
it was
story,
a really
man.
good story, and, it literally was the only interview of his type that he did. I mean, I think he probably did some later in the 80s, but they're in the middle of when Zeppelin were, gods on this earth. There was never another interview like that. So
very cool story.
Yeah, man, fun days.
Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. Folks, we're talking with Mr. Steve Rosen tonight on the Joe Wentz Project podcast. And we have right here Tonechaser, which is his book that he wrote, and this has all the interviews he's done with Eddie Van Halen, and then a little bit in between here and there. Very interesting stuff. Amazing book. Also, if you check the links down below in the description, you can get your copy if you want a hardback edition, or if you want the audiobook, you can get that as well, which you could get that right away. Of course, an audio download, or if you want both, you can get both, and there's a special going on with that. And it's if you're an Eddie Van Halen fan or a Van Halen fan, you need these books, man. I'm telling you, it's been like I've been like a kid in a candy store listening to all these, because I want to tell you, man, all the years, Steve, for me growing up, being a huge fan of Van Halen and all, it was, man, I would always get the Guitar Player magazines and Guitar World and whatever else, and I would take them to school, and then during class I would read the interviews, man. You know, I'd sit there because of you were able to bring us into that world from the stories that you wrote, man. And me personally, I just want to say thank you, man, because I would have never known any of this if you hadn't taken the time to write it. And it was just, you know, and now getting to talk to you is a complete honor. It really is.
That's very cool for you to say that, man. You know, for me, what was important when I was writing was I loved connecting with that audience, whoever was reading those stories. I wanted to know, well, what did you think about the stories? Because writing is a pretty solitary exercise, right? You know, I sat in my room, and a lot of the stories are written on typewriters. I mean, some of those early stories are written on a portable typewriter. My mother owned an Underwood typewriter that was literally from the 40s. I can't tell you how many stories I wrote on that Underwood typewriter. You know, so you're sitting there writing a story, you send it off to a magazine, and it gets published, and hopefully it's not edited down too much. And then that's it. It comes out, and I would see the story, you know, and I'd see my name there, and that always meant something. But I always wondered, well, did anybody read the story? You know, even up to the time of the Guitar World stories, you know, Guitar World articles, you know, it's like, are people really reading them? You know, do they read them front to back? You know, does it mean anything to them? I really didn't know, which is why I always try to make myself available to readers. And when I was going to write Edward's autobiography back in '85, and I posted a little note in the reader section, the letter section of Guitar World, said, hey, you know, if you have any Edward Van Halen stuff, let me know. And I put my address in there. And the editor said, don't do that. Don't put your address in there. I go, yeah, I want to, you know. And people would write to me and say, yeah, I read your stories, and it was so great, and I really loved them, and they meant something to me, you know. And I responded to every single person. And literally decades later, people would reach out after I wrote the book and go, yeah, man, I wrote to you, you know, when you were writing for Guitar World, and you wrote back to me on a little index card. I used to respond on an index card. I don't know why.
Wow.
And they would show me pictures of the index card.
Wow.
See that was everything, you know. And to think that, you know, like you, Joe, you took me to your class, your school. That to me is the greatest. You know, it's like, I mean, that's everything I would wish for. You know, that I would be in somebody's bedroom. You know, they're reading it, or you know, I just love that stuff. And so when I hear from people and I read, you know, that they've read the book and it meant something to them, I mean, that's everything to me. You know, awesome. I mean, it really is. It's just, you know, because without anybody reading your book, it's not a book. It's this thing that you've written, these words on a page. It means nothing. You know, so yeah, I've always, you know, thrived by the feedback from people. You know, so
that's amazing. That's, like I said, I love good stories. I love a good storyteller, and as everybody can see tonight, you are an excellent storyteller. I mean, it's just, I'm just sitting here going, wow. You know, I love that. Another good thing, folks, about the audiobook, like I said before, and as Steve has mentioned as well, you get to hear the full interviews that Steve taped on little micro cassette recorders or whatever it was back in the day that he used, and you can actually hear these interviews. And the good thing too, I was thinking about, since you were, I want to say you were a freelancer, correct?
Yes.
And if you were a freelancer, then those audio tapes should be your property, right? I mean, nobody can't really say, oh, well, that belongs to so and so publication. That's yours because you were a freelancer, right?
That's exactly right. And I've talked to some lawyers just, to make sure everything was, free and clear. I don't want to step on anybody's toes. And one of the first questions they asked is, were you, on the staff of Guitar Player? Were you on the staff of Guitar World? And, from the day I first started writing, I was always a freelancer. So that's my property, all my
that's
personal
awesome.
archives. And and for a long time, I kept all those Van Halen interviews private. It was like, you know what? I've written the interviews, and you can read about them, but I'm uncomfortable having you listen to them, and I'm not sure why. It was just so personal. It's like, that's me there, and not so much Edward, but it's like me, and now you're going to hear me, and what are they going to think? I've always thought like that, But then at a point in time, I put up a couple on my YouTube page, and the response was pretty amazing. And I realized that, people want to hear that stuff, that hearing his voice back in the day in 78 and 79 and 80.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's not a lot of that stuff around.
No,
And,
sure ain't.
I was lucky to, to have been there and to have all those conversations that weren't always musically centered. There's a lot of, private conversations, and I posted a lot of that stuff as well, put up a lot of that stuff. And the other thing here is that what you're hearing, this audio, so I would interview Edward, and the interview would be, 45 minutes. But when I transcribed it, and I only had, I was told, hey, there's only, 10 pages of the magazine, whatever it was. I realized, oh my God, there's, I can't use all of it. Or there might be bits where Edward was sort of, maybe just wandering a bit in his answer, or maybe my question was a little long-winded. So that got cut down. So what you're reading in the book and what was in the magazines were sort of truncated, edited down versions. The essence was still there. But, so Ed, you started playing, one of your homemade strats in 75, whatever it was. When the entire question would have been, well, Ed, I know you must have been checking out Fenders and, you're listening to guys playing strats, but, you were playing your homemade, guitar in 75. You know what I mean? And I thought, well, I can't put all that in there. It's going to run over. So that was taken out. But what you're hearing in the audiobook, you're hearing. I left a lot of that in. So you're actually hearing more than is represented in the hardback. And there's some pretty amazing stuff that I've kind of left in. I think people are just going to really, really love it. I mean,
I love it. I absolutely love it. The audiobook for me was the absolute, just the greatest thing in the world. I do have a quick question on this. This is kind of a little side note here. I don't know. Have you happened to have seen on Paramount Plus? They have something called Behind the Music, and on season 2, episode 3, there's actually a thing with Wolfgang Van Halen. Mm-hmm. Have you happened to see that by any chance?
I just saw it was just on a couple months ago, right? Or a month ago?
Yeah, I just happened. I had canceled my Paramount Plus subscription sometime back, and when I heard about this episode with Wolfgang, I went ahead and got back with Paramount Plus just so I could watch it, and it was really good. I didn't know what your thoughts were about that episode, and what were your thoughts?
Yeah, so Wolf was on and Valerie was on. I was surprised he did it. I mean, I'm happy he did it. Obviously, he misses his dad terribly, which is completely understandable. Yeah, I think he showed his human side. Valerie was cool. She obviously missed Edward, and it was good. I mean, yeah, I was surprised he did it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But
Right.
yeah, I think it was cathartic for him, and yeah, I mean, part of me wishes that I could get the audiobook to Wolf. You know, I think, wouldn't he be interested to hear his dad talking in
Exactly. That's where I was leading up. That's where I was leading into next.
Yeah, and that it's been like this. It's like this dream of mine. The phone's going to ring, and hey, this is Wolf, and maybe he's heard about the book and go, hey, you know what? I've heard about the book, and I don't think it's any good. Hey, this is feelings. But you do my dad for all those years, Maybe you could tell me something about my dad.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, life doesn't work that way, and I don't know if that will ever happen. But I think about that, and I'm thinking about all this audio in this book, and I think there's that section in there early on, way before Edward ever had Wolf. I said, hey man, do you want to have kids? And he said, yeah, I'd like to have kids. And I remember asking him, would you like them to be in music? And he goes, well, whatever they want to do, And I thought, wow, that's such an amazing answer, because you thought we just said, yeah, I want him to be a guitar player,
Yeah.
He didn't say that.
Yeah.
And then, one of the last conversations we had, he said, oh, listen to this, and I could tell he was actually putting up another, like he had some kind of a recording device. I think it was like a little digital recorder or something that he was putting up to his phone. So the quality wasn't great, but I could hear somebody playing drums, and it, it really did sound like John Bonham. I figured it was some track from Alex. And I go, wow. He goes, yeah, that's Wolf. I go, you're kidding.
Wow.
No, he's 11 years old. I go, you're kidding.
Wow.
And I will bet you, and I write in the book, I will bet you, and I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure that's the first time that he ever really spoke about Wolf, to any kind of a person outside the family, you know what I mean?
Right.
And probably maybe the first time anyone ever heard Wolf play, again, outside of the family. But I go, my God, that's amazing. That's when he tells me the story. And Wolf, I think Wolf may have even repeated the story. And I've got even a better version of it, because I've got Edward telling me about it. Wolf's talking about, yeah, my dad taught me to play the drums. And I think if I'm getting my documentaries right, that they talks about Edward teaching him how to play drums in 5 minutes. And Edward, and I write about that in the book, yeah, I taught him how to play drums in 5 minutes. And, coming from anybody else but Edward Van Halen, talking about his son, I go, yeah, right, like somebody's going to learn the drums in 5 minutes. And Ed would tell me, yeah, I told him, the bass drum is one, and Edward's explaining this over the phone. And, I thought that was remarkable. And my point being, I go, my God, if Wolf could hear that, I think he would love to hear that, wouldn't he? But anyway, yeah, it was good. I mean,
so you've never talked to Wolf ever? You've never interviewed him or talked to him? Okay.
I'm afraid to try to reach out. In my mind, it's this thing. I know that he's been vocal. In his social media, people have said horrific things about him.
Yeah, totally uncalled for.
Yeah, he looks at my book and dismisses it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so there you go.
He seems like a very, very together young man. Him and my son are the same age. Actually, my son's a year older than him. That's what blows my mind. That I've already gotten that old. Like what? So, I have to ask you this, man. As we all know, Van Halen has had 3 singers, 3 vocalists during its awesome career. In your opinion, Steve, which out of the 3 was your favorite vocalist of Van Halen? So
let me start backwards. I liked the Gary Sharon record. I thought he was a really good singer. I thought he was a good lyric writer. But it just had everything going against it. Van Halen fans were willing to accept the second singer into the band. They weren't willing to accept the third singer. And I don't know if any singer could have filled that spot.
Right.
Yeah, they could have gotten, Paul Rogers, whatever. I don't think anybody would have worked by that time.
Right.
That being said, I guess I prefer the Dave era stuff because I like those records better than the 5150 era records. I guess it's because I was hanging out with Edward at that time, and those records were coming out. We were hanging out, and, I'd hear them, and then he'd come over to the pad, or I'd go to his place. So everything is tied into that memory,
Right.
So, yeah, I suppose in answer to your question, it was the Dave.
Well, that's fine.
But really, it was the music more than me saying, "Oh, Dave was a better singer than Sammy." That's a ridiculous comment to make.
Right.
Dave might be your favorite singer over Sammy, but is he a better singer? Does Sammy have a bigger range? Yeah. Does that make him a better singer? If that's your definition of a better singer, then yes, he is. If I play faster than you, am I a better guitar player than you? If that's your definition of a good guitar player is playing fast, then yeah, I'm a better guitar player.
Right.
So, yeah,
and it's all subjective. It's all subjective. It's just. But I'll tell you mine real quick. I wasn't a fan of the third era. I just wasn't a fan of that. That one song Without You was okay, but everything was kind of all over the place. I wasn't a fan of that record. Gary Sharon, in my opinion, is amazing and extreme. Him and Nuno together are just like a hand in a glove. It's awesome, but I just didn't care for that era. But I always loved the Roth era stuff. I think the Roth era is amazing. But ironically enough, when I really got into Van Halen, when I really paid attention to them was during the 5150 album. And that's when I really started to like, whoa, wait a minute, because that was in 86 and I got my guitar Christmas Eve of that year. So after I got the 5150 cassette, album on cassette format rather, I would go back every little bit and I'd start getting from Van Halen 1 on all the way up to 1984 over a period of months or whatever. But I have to take a statement, like a quote rather, from my son. I'm going to paraphrase it. My son, he said, if you want to hear great guitar playing and guitar slinging and all that, definitely check out the Roth era stuff. But if you want to hear some great songwriting, check out the Sammy Hagar era of Van Halen. And I thought that made perfect sense to me because everything changed when Sammy got in there, and the songwriting, it did change because it was, Sammy is a great songwriter, and he was also a solo artist before that. So he had a great career before Van Halen, but that's just me. That's just my 2 cents.
Well, we don't really want to hear your 2 cents, Joe. So, no, that makes sense. Yeah. So Edward's writing changed a lot, right? Now a lot of more keyboard stuff in it. But again, it's the same thing with you. Your memories are tied into your first guitar and the 5150 record. If you've gotten your first guitar in 1978, that first record, I'll bet you $1 million it would be the Roth records.
Right.
You know what I mean? And when people have these debates back and forth, I would bet you that the people who are Van Halen fans from the Dave era stuff are a little older than the Sammy Hagar fans. Look, it's not hard and fast rule, but they grew up hearing those records.
Right.
Before they heard them in succession, and then heard the Sammy Hagar records. And if your first record was 5150, I'll bet you that those people are more Sammy Hagar fans because everything you're doing is tied up into that. So if you're in whatever, you're in 10th grade when you hear that first record, and then It's those memories
Right.
of your first car, your first,
Oh yeah.
job,
Yeah.
or so man, it's hard to separate that stuff, which is why um, you know everybody heard that first Van Halen record and thought it was incredible. They thought Edward was amazing.
Absolutely. Oh
They heard
yeah.
it was amazing. I thought the record was average. I thought it was
Wow.
mediocre the first time I heard it, because I had
Wow.
grown up listening to Truth and Beck Olaf, the first two Jeff Beck records, and the Zeppelin records, and the Hendrix records, and Robin Trower with Procol Harum, who got one of the most amazing Les Paul sounds I've ever heard, and Paul Kossoff with Free, and Martin Barr with Tall. I mean, those Pete Townsend, The Who. I mean, that was my bar, man. So I saw that bar was really high, and if you want
Right.
to reach that bar, you better be fucking amazing. You better blow me away.
Right.
Eric Clapton with Cream. I mean, my God. So I heard that first record, and I thought, yeah, it's good. I remember getting the record, and I seen the frog. Oh my God, that's Edward. And this is his band. That's the record. And and I remember putting on and hearing, Run with the Devil, and going, yeah, that's okay. And I jump skipped around and heard some of the songs, some of the fast shuffles. And I thought, yeah, it's like Deep Purple, fast
Right.
Deep Purple shuffles, but not done as well. And then, I sat there. I was disappointed. I wanted to be blown away. I wanted to be like blown away the way I was when I heard the first Hendrix record, the first Zeppelin record. First time I heard Good Times, Bad Times. My God, I thought, this is the beginning of something. This
Right.
is going to change everything, and it was. And I wanted that Van Halen record to be the same thing, but it wasn't. And I thought, you know what, I'm missing something. And I write about this in the book. And I could have lied, and I could have said, yeah, I was blown away like everybody else. But that wasn't the truth. So I went back the next day. I sat down, made a big cup of coffee, and I sat down and listened to it carefully. And I go, oh my God, that's what everybody hears. That's the tone. That's that fucking groove he's got. That's that feel he has. Those are those riffs like I've never heard before. So I got it then. It just took me 24 hours to figure it out.
That's cool, man. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. When I had 5150 first, and like I said, I went back, and then the next album I bought was the first Van Halen album, and I was like, wow. But my first initial hearing of Van Halen was actually a friend of mine, Ralph, the one I talked about earlier. We were in high school, and we were going to a talent show, and a friend of ours came to pick us up because we didn't have our driver's license yet, and we were going to our local high school to a talent show, and our buddy popped in a cassette, and at the time we didn't know that other buddy was a huge Van Halen fan, and of course I'd heard of Van Halen, but I wasn't into him like I would eventually become. And what comes on across the speakers is the intro for Mean Street, where he's doing all that crazy stuff going on. And I'm sitting in the back seat. I remember the guy was driving a little Nissan Sentra, and I'm in the back seat, and our buddy's driving, and my buddy Ralph's in the passenger seat. And I hear this come through the little rinky-dink speakers in the back, and I said, "Man, what the hell is that?" And my buddy Ralph looks at the guy driving. He goes, "Oh, that's Van Halen, ain't it?" And he goes, "Yeah, that's him." And I looked, and I was like, "That's Van Halen?" And when I heard that intro to Mean Street, I was just like, "How the hell is he doing that?" And that's really what kicked it off for me. And then if you fast forward to the summer of that year, that's when we saw that band playing at the lake, that I saw a guy warming up with a Fender Strat, or the band started that night. We were at sound check. It was just a little campground, but it was a huge deal for me because that's what really kicked off the whole thing for guitar with me. And then you fast forward to Christmas Eve of that year, and I got my first knockoff Strat. But yeah, it was wild, man. But yeah, listen to all those Van Halen albums were fantastic. And then, like I said, actually getting to read your book and listen to your book, it brought back all those memories. And then I was like, wow, man, I haven't thought about that in forever. So it's really cool. It's like strolling down another avenue of memory lane for me. because I can't remember everything, of course, but listening to your book, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember reading that article, and it would little bits and pieces would pop into my memory, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. So personally, that's why I love it so much, because it really triggered a lot of that cool stuff.
Nice.
And it was, so what you're doing, man, and what you have done and what you continue to do is amazing. I mean, I was like, golly, man. Let's see. I want to read a couple of comments real quick. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know you probably got things to do and got to eat dinner or whatever.
Actually, I'm sorry, Joe. I'm actually past my bedtime.
Oh, okay. Well, I can.
No. I mean, I'm half joking. Anybody who knows me, and if you read the book and my previous cat, I should actually give him some of the royalties for the book. He would wake up at 3 a.m. and he'd want to be fed.
Arpeggio, right? Yeah.
Right. So I'd wake up and I'd feed him, and I'd try to go back to sleep, and I couldn't sleep. That's when one night, August 24th, my birthday, I remember that day. So I go to my room, and I thought, I can't go back to sleep. I'd been thinking about a book. I started to pound it on the computer keyboard, and I come up with that intro paragraph of what would be in Tonechaser. So I would wake up. Literally, he would wake up at 2 in the morning, or 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. So I'm up at 4 in the morning. So by like 7 o'clock at night.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm falling asleep. So like this morning, the cat, I have another cat, Overdub, but he does a thing. He sleeps a little later. He'll sleep somewhere between 4 and 5, but I'm always up by 5. So like by 6 or 7 in the evening, man, I've been up like 14 or 15 hours. It's like I'll just go, lounge in bed, and, if I stay up too late, the cat will wake up again. I'll be up again. But so I apologize.
Okay,
no, man,
cool.
I was half joking. But
I'll get ready to wrap this up. I want to hit a couple of these comments. CC comments. He says that we were talking about, since you were a freelancer and that those audio tapes are your property. He says, yes, it's Steve's property per Edward's wishes. When it's over, Uno in the end, and Steve kept his word. All right, very cool. Very cool. Let me see here.
I'm sorry,
Wolfie
Joe.
was four. Sorry,
I'm sorry, Joe.
go ahead.
CC met Edward when Wolfie was 4 or 5.
Yeah, it says Wolfie was 4 or 5 when I met Edward, and I'm sure Wolf would love to hear the audiobook. In my humble opinion, he says.
Maybe one of these days.
One of these days, yeah. We'll have to see how things go. Mr. Martin, we were talking about 5150 and all the other Van Halen albums. Mr. Martin says the first Van Halen album I had was also 5150. I was 12 years old. That also influenced my appreciation of each period. Very nice.
Right. So let's test our theory here. So Martin, are you a fan of Sammy or Dave? And if he says Dave, then my whole theory goes down the well. You better say fucking Sammy.
Oh my goodness. Well, let me ask you this real quick. Sammy is on tour right now, and it's billed as Sammy Hagar. He's on tour, and my son went to see that show about 3 weeks ago, and they came to Charlotte, and he absolutely loved it. And so you got Mr. Joe Satriani on guitar, which I think is awesome. And, of course, Michael Anthony, Sammy Hagar, and Jason Bottom, and another gentleman on keyboards. That has caught a lot of good vibes and a lot of bad vibes from different people. And just for me, I've said on this channel a few times, I understand people have an opinion, but it's not billed as Van Halen or Van Halen tribute. It's billed as Sammy Hagar. But I think a lot of people I don't know if they just can't get past it, or they don't want to accept it, or they just, I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I've only heard little bits and pieces. People will post, from they've been on the show and they'll record it on the phone. So I've only heard little bits and pieces. I mean, it sounds, can Sammy sing the way he used to? I mean, maybe his range isn't as wide. I guess people are saying, there's too many of Sammy's songs. I mean, it's kind of understandable, right? Yeah, people want, exact Van Halen stuff. If they want Van Halen stuff, there's a million tribute bands out there that do that perfectly well.
Right.
I remember reading comments, when Joe first got in the band, Joe can't play every Van Halen licks. And not that Joe Satriani needs me to defend him, but I've known Joe, I've interviewed him a bunch, I think like the second or third solo record, going way back. He posted that amazing video with the book, he's one of the early supporters, and I wrote back, I said, anybody who believes that Joe Satriani can't play Van Halen licks is just, you're just so stupid. You don't even deserve to be spoken to. And sure enough, so, I guess they saw him on it was at Howard Stern early morning show, and he hadn't practiced the beginning of Mean Streets or something, and he didn't quite do it exactly, and they go, Joe can't play that stuff. Are you kidding me? And now it's like, oh my God, Joe Satriani, how good is he? Yeah, and what Joe's done is, he's Joe Satriani. Joe Satriani was in Deep Purple, and
that's right.
Had to replace Richie Blackmore, which is arguably as hard a job as it was trying to, not that he's trying to replace Edward, but that's what people are, the ears used to hearing that. But but I'm sure the songs are amazing. They sound incredible. Mike's there doing all those harmonies, and people. I don't know, man. I get it. They romanticize what that was with Sammy and with Dave, and they want to hear that again. And that's gone. That's not going to happen again. But I guess the question is, would you be happier if Sammy hadn't done the tour? Are you that unhappy with it that if he had never gone out there, would that have been better?
Well, that whole era of music would have never resurfaced if Sammy hadn't done this tour. That's what I was thinking. That nobody was playing these songs, and then Sammy does this tour, and I'm like, thank God these songs can be born again. So that's how I looked at it. And that's when I seen Van Halen, was during the Hagar era. That I was, when they were with Dave, I was too young. I didn't, didn't really know much about them. And then I seen them on the 0812 tour, and I seen them on Balance. And it was phenomenal, in my opinion. It was great. But ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get ready to wrap this up. So I know Steve has to get ready to shuffle off here. We want to let you know, please check the links below for Tonechaser. We've interviewed Steve here for almost 2 hours talking about this wonderful book. He has graciously taken his time to talk about excerpts from this book, certain chapters and everything else. Also, there's an audio form of this book available in the links below in the description. Please check those out and get your copies today. You will not be disappointed. I can tell you personally, these books are amazing, and the storytelling is absolutely phenomenal. And to hear Eddie speak in these interviews from way back in '78 all the way up until the most recent in the book is fabulous. And Steve does a wonderful job in telling these stories, and you can't go wrong with these books, man. You cannot go wrong at all. So it's amazing. I want to say, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and I hope I didn't keep you too long. And I just want to say thanks for taking the time, man. It's been an absolute honor.
Very, very welcome, Joe, man. I appreciate the invite, and I posted your your little video that you sent me.
Yes.
On my Facebook page, people really dug that, And,
awesome.
I tell people, I discovered this guy, Joe Wentz. He's pretty good, right? So,
oh Lord.
But seriously, no, man, I appreciate it, and I can tell you, you're passionate about it, and that means everything to me. And thank you to everybody out there.
Yes.
Stopping by, love your questions, and go check out the book. Go check out the audiobook. You'll love the audiobook. It's a little over 30 hours long, so keep your Van Halen urges, your Van Halen fix will be good for a few days there. So thanks so much, guys.
For a long time. That's right. All right, Steve, if you can just hang on there for a second, Steve, let me say goodbye to everybody here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. And we will see you next time around. I'm on vacation this week, so I got a lot of things to do, but we'll see you on the next episode. Again, thank you to Steve Rosen, and thank you to everybody in the chat. We appreciate it so much. Everybody, God bless. Have a safe night. Be kind to each other. Until then, rock on. We'll see you later. Take care, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.
She came in and sat down right in front of me. She picked up a glass of wine as I took to see. She said,